Broadcasting from the Cass Corridor in Detroit, this is The Metro, a slice of news, culture, and conversation. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. Today on the program, cannabis sales in Michigan are slowing down. We'll sift through the smoke and get some clarity on the numbers.
Plus, a lot of vulnerable people in Michigan are worried about losing rights. That includes trans kids and adults. We'll discuss what's at stake.
And it's Women's History Month, so we'll preview an event celebrating women at the intersection of hip-hop culture and design.
Also, Detroit has a lot of famous exports. Fashion isn't high on that list, but Detroit style is a vibe.
So how do you define that vibe? But before we get into that, ever since Michigan voters approved the sale of recreational cannabis 7 years ago, residents have been clamoring to get it, and businesses have capitalized on that demand. The number of pot retailers grew from 6 back in November 2019 to over 850 today. That's all according to the Cannabis Regulatory Agency.
But the price of cannabis is down, Robin, and that's making it difficult for businesses to turn a profit. So what does that mean for Michigan's economy, where cannabis is now a big industry? Adrienne Roberts covers Michigan's cannabis industry, as well as jobs and unemployment for the Detroit Free Press. And she joined us right now. Adrienne, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. So let's briefly set the stage first with Michigan's cannabis industry. What are the major milestones since Michigan started selling cannabis recreationally? What's some of the important things that we've seen happen?
Right. So sales started in December 19 in Michigan, and that's when recreational cannabis was legalized. And so what happened after that is, there's an unlimited number of licenses that can be issued at the state level, but each municipality has to opt in if they want to allow the sale of cannabis, if they want to allow growers, processors. So it's kind of been an uneven rollout across the state. It's not like if you're living in any certain community, you can go and buy cannabis tomorrow. It really depends. And so, a lot of what I followed is what the city of Detroit has done. And so they took a little longer to get their recreational marijuana ordinance written. And sales just started in January 2023. So we're just coming up on a little over 2 years here. Since then, and that ordinance took a long time to craft, and there was lawsuits. And so now you can easily get cannabis in Michigan. It's one of the states, compared nationally, like there is good access for consumers, but we're still seeing other municipalities opt in at this point and try to get their ordinance rolled out.
Yeah, and the sector saw a lot of growth early on, but how does Michigan's cannabis industry compare to other states? You talked just a little bit about it, but what does it look like compared to those states like Colorado,
California, Washington, Oregon?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Ohio, which is now a part of the.
That's exactly right. Ohio just legalized in August, so we're starting to see how that impacts Michigan's cannabis market, because a lot of people do come from Ohio and buy in Michigan, but broadly speaking, this stat always blows my mind when I think about it. So Michigan just surpassed $10 billion in sales since recreational marijuana started in December 2019. So $10 billion, that's a crazy number to me.
Wow. Astronomical.
Yeah. And what's interesting about Michigan's market is that, it's not the biggest cannabis market in terms of the dollar amount sold, but it is the biggest market and has been by many metrics for at least a year in terms of the volume sold. So per resident, Michigan consumers are buying the most cannabis of any other state in the country.
Okay, what does that say about Michiganders?
It says something. It says something. We'll need a report soon on that. It says something that we're going to dig through the information. But total sales of marijuana have increased over the years, but that increase has slowed down and prices are dropping. It seems to be that part of that is due to the fact that we have so much quantity of it here in the state of Michigan. We're able to grow quite a bit. We are an agricultural state, so I would assume that lends to that.
Yeah. This is kind of what's interesting about the Michigan market at this point. So at the state level, there is no limit on how many licenses can be issued. So what happened is everyone came in, as long as they meet these qualifications, they can get a license. And so a lot of growers set up, indoor grow facilities, and there's outdoor grow facilities as well. What happened, though, is they just grew simply too much cannabis. There is too much to support the market. And what's happening is that prices are just each month. I look at these monthly reports that Michigan's Cannabis Regulatory Agency puts out, and sales just, or the price rather, continues to decline because there's just so much. There's too much cannabis flower just sitting there. So that's kind of where we are today.
Yeah, and I'm interested too as well, because I'm wondering if we could see in the near future, just based on what you've been reporting and seeing over the years since 2019, especially as it grows across the country, do we see it becoming something that Michigan starts to export, or is it already an export out of Michigan to other places?
Yeah, it's interesting. So because it's still federally illegal, it can only be sold in Michigan. I mean, this would all change if it becomes legalized. Now, I mean, everyone in the industry has been talking about legalization since I started, and it's always been something that's on the horizon, but we're not close to that at this point. So if you want to sell marijuana in Michigan, you have to grow here. So, I mean, that's an interesting question, and I think, like, to your point, too, about, how much marijuana are Michigan consumers consuming. We do have a lot of tourism here. So people in states that don't have legal recreational cannabis, they'll come here. Summer tourism is a big thing, and they'll go to a dispensary. People from Ohio will drive up, and they're still doing that because marijuana is cheaper in Michigan than it is in Ohio. So, right now, though, it's just you can only buy and sell in Michigan.
Right on the federal, which I believe the federal government right now has other priorities in front of their faces.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think in the cannabis industry is, they're disappointed in that.
Yes. So low prices are great for shoppers. We're talking about it now. It's just so much available right now. But we do see that folks are losing their jobs in the industry. Is this a sign that the industry is in trouble in any way?
Yeah, this is the tough thing, and you've really got to think about it from two different perspectives. For consumers, it's a great time to be a consumer. You can go to a dispensary and get a lot for very little that you have to spend. Now, in the industry, we are starting to see some mass layoffs happening as these grow facilities are shutting their doors because they just simply can't turn a profit. So I think that's that's the kind of dichotomy of it, right? Is that workers are losing their jobs in what was once a really burgeoning industry in Michigan, and it still is by some metrics. But yeah, consumers, as long as there's dispensaries close by, they're in good shape.
Yeah, and they're not hard to find at all. And just staying at the industry level, talking about the industry, of course, there are so many other sectors that rely on cannabis industry now. You talked about it being a $10 billion. So will there be cascading effects from these prices dropping and the job losses for other businesses that are impacted directly by the cannabis industry?
That's a great question. I don't think we've started to see the fallout from that yet. I think we're getting close, but you're right. There are all these other industries that support cannabis. And I think, too, it's like with communities are going to be impacted as workers are laid off. And, it's the economy right now is in okay shape, right? But there are fears of recession. So it remains to be seen if they can get another job in another industry. And working in cannabis, and if they want to continue to work in cannabis, might be tough.
You're listening to The Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. We're talking about the recent challenges facing Michigan's cannabis industry with Detroit Free Press business reporter Adrian Roberts. Adrian, let's talk a little bit more about locals who comprise the industry. Do we know how much of Michigan's cannabis industry is occupied by local businesses versus, let's say, those that were established in other states and then set up shop here?
Yeah, I think that was a big criticism of what happened when Michigan first started allowing recreational marijuana in the state. What happened is a lot of big companies came in and got those licenses and started operating. And I think people in the industry and who were excited about opening their grow facility or their dispensary were going, what happened? Like, how did this is supposed to be like a locally a local industry? So the tough part about this is that as the industry has gotten increasingly competitive, if you don't have scale, it makes it really hard to operate. And the companies that are doing better than others are the ones that are vertically integrated, so they can control the pricing from the grow to the processor to what they're going to sell it for. If you just have one single dispensary, it makes it a lot tougher to turn a profit.
Yeah, I can imagine that. And that does make me think about dispensaries in Detroit. And I realize that that's a big focus for you. We know Detroit City Council didn't issue recreational licenses to businesses until 2023. That was over 3 years after it was being sold in cities across the state. Business owners were concerned they'd lose customers to recreational shops in the suburbs. Now, if I remember correctly from some previous reporting I did, Detroit now has the most dispensaries,
yeah, that's
right?
correct. More than 50.
Yeah, so it's been lucrative to shop owners here in the city, I'm guessing. What's your reporting been telling us about that?
Yeah, so and I remember covering this because those years when Detroit did not have dispensaries, it felt like a really long time, especially as they were watching Hamtramck, Hazel Park open up dispensaries. And the people with, especially medical marijuana dispensary owners, were going, I am turning away customers. Like, people are coming saying, I want to buy recreational marijuana. And they're like, we can't do it. So it did take a longer time for them to start selling recreational marijuana. I think the question and what they're facing at this point is that a lot of them, it's hard to get a loan as a cannabis business because it's not federally legal. So they may have taken on deals that weren't necessarily advantageous to them. And then as we're seeing these prices drop, it's hard for them to turn a profit.
It makes me think, too, about a lot of Black and brown folks who've been disproportionately criminalized for selling a drug that is now legalized. And if they are having the opportunity to really turn a profit and have a shot at creating businesses. So 5 years in, what would you say about the opportunities available to folks who come from communities that, again, were over-policed and disproportionately criminalized for the use of marijuana?
No, absolutely. And this is what Detroit was trying to get right, and what other communities have been criticized for. They really wanted to set aside a certain number of licenses to make it right in a way. People who have been disproportionately impacted by the enforcement of cannabis. So, I just looked recently, and I was surprised there's only 16 of those more than 50 dispensaries. Only 16 are Detroit legacy, or there's a specific term for it, and it really refers to people who have either lived in the city of Detroit for a long time or have been disproportionately impacted. And so what that tells me is that while they have the opportunity to open, the business conditions aren't what they maybe thought they would be.
Are there some programs that are easily accessible to these folks? I'm thinking about what was available when I was living in Colorado, and there were some specific state and city programs to help folks, especially Black business owners, to get into the industry.
Yeah, there are grant programs at both the state and city level that do address that. They're awarding grants. I just don't know if it's enough to. I mean, it's something that they should obviously look into. But
it's still basically there are still barriers to even getting to those grants and getting to those opportunities. So I think that we're still seeing that there's a disconnect between who actually has access to it and who has the upward mobility to actually take advantage of it. So
yeah, I remember covering a few years ago what was being addressed at Detroit City Council was the issue that there weren't many available properties even for people to open because of the restrictions where you can't open a business near a school or a church. There was just so few. And then what was happening is they were driving up the prices of those properties because they knew this is like one of the only locations a cannabis business can open. So it's just all these other challenges that go into it that make it a tough business.
We know that a lot of proponents for legalizing marijuana have long argued that it would provide much needed revenue for folks more broadly through taxes. How is the drug tax? Do we know how those tax dollars are being spent?
Yeah. So, they're being distributed each year. Detroit got the most this year because it has the most number of dispensaries. And when I talk to communities, a lot of that is going to the general fund. And I mean, that's real money. And at this point, we're seeing that number that communities are getting who have opted in to allowing recreational marijuana sales. That is increasing. So, it is helpful, and it goes to the school aid fund. So, yeah, as the industry grows, that money goes back to the communities. Now, I don't know if it's going to be growing much more. The question is really, at this point, have we reached the peak?
Before we let you go, we have to acknowledge something that does have some folks in the industry a little worried or perturbed, and that is that Governor Whitmer recently proposed a 32% wholesale tax on marijuana to fix the damn roads. How would that impact the industry?
The industry is, as you can imagine, extremely, extremely concerned about this. As it is, they are having trouble making ends meet, and to think about taxing, so there's already a 10% excise tax and the 6% Michigan sales tax on cannabis products, a 32% tax. Many say they'd go out of business, and it would drive consumers, if that price goes up that much, it would drive consumers back to the illicit market. That's what they say could happen, which no one wants that.
Adrienne Roberts covers Michigan's cannabis industry, jobs, and unemployment for the Detroit Free Press. Adrienne, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you for having me.
From the WDET newsroom, Detroit's getting another area code this fall. The Michigan Public Service Commission says the region is running out of available 313 numbers. Oh no! New phone customers will be assigned 679 area codes in November. I got to get through this. I'm feeling a little... It'll cover the same area, which includes the city and some adjacent communities. People with 313 numbers won't have to change them, but starting in October, they will have to dial all 10 digits to call anyone. 679 will be Michigan's 13th area code. I'm rendered speechless.
I mean, we're the 313.
I guess we're now the 679.
I don't know. There's not really a ring to that.
Yeah, 679. You know what? To the alpha children who have no phones yet, you're 679 babies. That's what they're going to grow up with. So just think about that. Like, they're the ones who have no phones yet, who will get new lines within the next 10 years. They're 679.
You heard it here first on the Metro. Tia Graham has just coined the next generation. They are the 679 babies. Coming up at 11, Detroit's known for its cars, its music, but what about its style? What about the mink fur coats, gator shoes, and streetwear that people like to show off here? We'll be discussing Detroit fashion, and we want to hear from you. What do you think Detroit's style is? What kind of clothing reminds you of this city? The number is 313-577-1019.
Up next, the Trump administration has been dismantling the rights of transgender young people and adults. Our next guest says these moves should make everyone pay attention. We'll be right back on the Metro. Stay right there.